One of the first things that I get asked by somebody who has been in an abusive relationship is, how do I even begin to start healing after this abusive relationship? And of course, there isn't one single straightforward, quick, easy fix or answer. And over the last 11 years of supporting women who've been in abusive relationships with a narcissist, with some other abusive personality type, or who have experienced different types of trauma, I have created a model called the Empowered Healing Compass. And it simply lays out the key stages in 360-degree healing. So the first point on this compass is awareness. We need to have awareness, full clarity about what really happened, but also awareness of why that happened, the origins of us being in that situation where we were traumatized and or abused. So awareness is the first point. Then once we have that awareness, we can begin the healing work. And after that has been done, or after the bulk of that has been done, it doesn't have to be complete. You don't have to feel completely and fully healed in order to move on to the other two stages, which are about goal setting and growth. But you need to have covered in depth the first two parts, that awareness and the healing work, before you can go on to the growth work. But of course, it is cyclical, and you will still keep having light bulb moments and awarenesses of something that you hadn't noticed before over time as you process what happened to you. So, with that first point in mind, that awareness, I'm going to talk you through the key aspect of identifying your vulnerability so that you can become fully aware of why you were vulnerable to that trauma, and specifically why you were vulnerable to be preyed on by an abuser or a narcissist. I'd say that the key type of vulnerability I see in my clients, even if they have other vulnerabilities that I'll mention in a few moments, is that they were a young child at the time that abuse or trauma, or both of course, were experienced. When we are young, we don't have experience of the world. We don't have wisdom. We don't have physical strength or a lot of mental strength. We don't have the tools to deal with a lot of stuff, and we are very easily overwhelmed and overpowered. So we are pretty much defenseless and can't stop an adult who is overpowering us in some way. So this, as I said, is perhaps the most common. And some clients, they may be aware of other vulnerabilities, as I say, that I'm going to mention in a few moments, but they hadn't realized that what happened to them in childhood was actually traumatic or abusive, because their childhood situation was normalized. That was all they knew. And anything that happened was normalized by the adults around them or minimized. So it may take a long time for somebody to be able to look back and say, yes, actually, that was abuse, that was trauma. And some of my clients have taken a long time to be able to accept that. They were adamant that they had a good childhood, but our brain has a way of protecting ourselves from this and stuffing things down and accepting that normalization that takes place. So we are unable to defend ourselves effectively when we're children. Physically, mentally, we don't have the tools that we need in order to deal with that overpowering, whatever form that may take. And this can create a huge vulnerability that is then tapped into and taken advantage of by other people later on in our life. And if this is you, if you experienced childhood trauma, childhood abuse, then you will need to do this part of your healing work with a trauma-informed therapist. And you will need to do inner child work primarily, but other modalities will be offered to you by a good accredited therapist. The inner child work is essential because there are so many emotions that are going to come up. It is not something that you can read a book, watch a few videos, and work through on your own. And during this work, you will be able to process all those strong emotions. There's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of resentment and anger that tend to come out as we go through that work. But that is something that you really shouldn't do alone. Before I go on to talk about the other vulnerabilities that an abuser may target, if we haven't met before, hi, I'm Amanda Craven. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, life coach, and author based in the UK, and I'm all about helping women rebuild their confidence and their life after trauma and abusive relationships. As well as the Confidence Comeback coaching membership for women, I have lots of free resources. So if you want to tell me in the comments where you're at the moment, I can signpost you to the most suitable resources for you at this moment in time. Okay, so let's look at the other vulnerabilities that help to make somebody an easy target for a narcissist or another type of abuser. First of all, we have poor mental health. So whether this is a short period of poor mental health, whether you're going through a short period of anxiety or depression, or whether this is a longer term condition that you have, this can make you vulnerable to somebody who initially will present themselves as your knight in shining armor in some way. So that's the first one. The second one is if you have poor physical health. If you're struggling with some aspect of your health, again, whether it's a short-term condition or whether it's a chronic condition or illness, you are more prone to somebody who, again, with their mask intact, is going to present them to you as somebody who can make your life better, who can really help you. And if you're not otherwise really well supported, because being isolated is part of that vulnerability, then of course you are going to feel that this is the answer to all your prayers. You are vulnerable if you are going through some period of financial difficulty. Again, this may be short term, it may be a longer term situation you're dealing with, but a narcissist and a manipulative abuser is going to present themselves as the answer to all your prayers. So you are going to be super grateful, and initially they will help you out, or they will appear to be helping you out, or they will certainly promise to do things to help you out. Whether or not they follow through on those promises is another matter, because as you may have discovered, it takes between, say, 3 months and a year for somebody to reveal their true colours as an abusive partner or friend. Different situations can lead to financial difficulty, of course. You may have accrued debts, you may have lost your job, you may have or have had a gambling addiction or some other addiction that has led to you getting into financial difficulty. In fact, having any sort of addiction is going to make you vulnerable, because inevitably addictions lead to some sort of financial difficulty, potentially even losing your home. You may already, when you meet the abuser, be experiencing another type of trauma. You could be going through a really difficult breakup, going through a really challenging divorce. There could be all sorts of things that again are going to create a vulnerability and make you easily grateful to somebody who pretends that they are going to help you. What we often find is that somebody gets into a cycle of abusive relationships. This behavior becomes normalized and familiar, and our brain is wired to steer us towards familiar people or familiar personality types and familiar situations, because it believes that as it's familiar, it means we can deal with this, and we are drawn towards these unhealthy relationships and cycles of unhealthy abusive relationships. So if this is you, this also creates a vulnerability, because a manipulative person is going to be able to see that you are very easily manipulated and abused. As I said at the beginning, more often than not, if we experience one of or more of those vulnerabilities in the second list that I talked about, the chances are that you have also experienced early childhood trauma or abuse, but not always. In my personal case, I had a good childhood and was brought up by loving parents, but at the point at which I was drawn into abusive relationships, I ticked some of those boxes. So I had cancer quite a few years ago, and that, of course, made me vulnerable. I had mental health issues and struggled with depression for a long time. And then when I was coming out of one abusive relationship, I was an easy target for my supposed knight in shining armor, who was rescuing me from all of the fallout from a very unpleasant divorce and separation. So I wonder how many of those resonated with you. If you're not sure, give yourself a bit of time to think and to be honest. Journal, go for a walk and think out loud, find a trusted friend, find a therapist that you can begin to do this work with. But that is absolutely crucial, to become aware of what your vulnerability or vulnerabilities was or were. Then you can really start the deep healing work. I hope I'll be able to keep you company on your journey. And if you have any specific requests for topics for me to cover in future videos, let me know. Until then, take really good care of you, and I'll see you next time.